My stepson Jake once laughed in front of his friends and said, "He's nobody to me, he's not my dad." The words did not cut quickly, like a sudden stab. They sank deeper, slower, like a verdict being carved into stone. They did not wound me with noise or sharpness. They hollowed me out with silence. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, when the house was alive with the restless energy of teenagers. Jake, 16, had brought two of his friends over. They sprawled across the living room couch, half watching a movie, half scrolling on their phones. I came in carrying a tray of snacks because that was what I did quietly without being asked. I tried to show care in the small ways. Food on the table, lights working, doors opening to warmth. One of the boys must have asked something about me. I only caught the tail end of it. Jake's answer came fast, sharp, as if he had rehearsed it before. He smirked, his voice casual but loud enough to reach me clearly. "He's nobody to me. He's not my dad." They laughed. I stood in the doorway for a second longer than I should have, holding the tray like a prop that no longer belonged in the scene. None of them looked my way. To them, I was invisible. To him, I was expendable. I set the tray down on the counter and walked upstairs. I did not confront him, did not shout or demand respect. Instead, I sat at my desk, logged into the airline portal, and quietly removed his name from the overseas trip we had been planning for weeks. No ceremony, no explanation, just a deletion, clean and irreversible. By evening, Jake had discovered what I had done. The meltdown was volcanic. He screamed at Laura, slammed doors, cursed under his breath. "You can't do this to me. You promised. You said we were going." His rage was directed everywhere except toward me. I was not included in his accusations. I was not acknowledged at all. I was a ghost standing in the same house he lived in, funding the same comforts he indulged in, yet utterly absent in his mind when it came to accountability. Laura tried to calm him, tried to mediate, but I remained silent. I watched, and in that silence, I felt something shift permanently inside me. My name is Mark. I am 38 years old. A man who deals in financial analytics for a living. Numbers are my refuge, my order, my shield against the chaos of the world. I have always been cautious with money, with trust, with promises. That caution was born from a childhood steeped in instability. My parents divorced when I was 12, torn apart not by lack of love, but by debts that multiplied like weeds in the dark. I remember the fights, voices rising in the night, my father's frustration, my mother's tears over bills that never stopped arriving. I remember eviction notices pinned like scarlet letters to our door. I remember the shame of hearing neighbors whisper about how we had lost everything. It was then that I understood. Recklessness with money is recklessness with love. If you can't guard the roof over your family's head, you can't guard the family itself. That lesson branded me, shaped me. I swore I would never allow such collapse to happen again. So I built myself carefully, piece by piece. I studied hard, worked harder, carved a career out of discipline and foresight. I saved when others spent. I invested when others wasted. My life was a series of measured risks, calculated steps. By 38, I had a home that was mine, a reputation built on reliability, and a heart that remained cautious but not entirely closed. When I met Laura, I thought I had found someone who understood the weight of responsibility. She was a woman who had endured her own storms. A failed marriage, the struggle of raising 2 children, the weariness of fighting battles mostly alone. I saw her strength, her resilience, and I respected it. When we joined our lives together, I knew it would not be simple. Blended families rarely are. I knew Jake and his younger sister carried wounds from their own father, a man who floated in and out of their lives with the irresponsibility of a tide that never stayed long enough to nourish the shore. I told myself I could be steady where he was fleeting, that consistency, patience, and quiet care would eventually matter. I was wrong. From the beginning, I poured myself into this family. I opened not just my home but my habits of security, my ways of ensuring stability. Vacations, school fees, birthday gifts, braces, groceries, heating bills, all of it absorbed without hesitation into my budget, as though these children were my own. I gave them the foundation I had never been given. I believed that over time respect would follow. But respect is not purchased. Respect is not owed simply because you show up. It must be chosen freely. Jake never chose it. Instead, he mirrored the voice of his absent father, weaponizing blood ties as though they were the only currency that mattered. He wielded the words, "You're not my dad," like a shield, one he could raise whenever responsibility or correction threatened to touch him. And Laura, though she told me she valued me, though she said all the right things in quiet conversations, rarely challenged him in the moments that counted. I told myself it was just adolescence, just rebellion, just the turbulence of blending families. I told myself patience would outlast resistance. But patience, too, can rot if it is never met with gratitude. That day in the living room, when Jake dismissed me in front of his friends, was not a first wound. It was an echo of many smaller ones. The rolling eyes when I asked him to clean up after himself, the way he turned to his mother for permission even when I had already given it, the pointed silence when I tried to start a conversation. Each small act alone might have been forgivable. Together, they formed a pattern. I was not acknowledged as part of his world. Still, something about hearing it said aloud, hearing him announce my irrelevance as though it were a punchline, crystallized the truth. In that moment, I understood exactly where I stood. I was the man who paid for the roof but had no voice under it. The man who arranged the vacations but was erased from the memory of who made them possible. The man who carried the burden of responsibility without the dignity of recognition. When I quietly deleted his ticket for the overseas trip, I was not being vindictive. I was being exact. I was showing him, without words, that his dismissal of me came with weight. If I was truly nobody to him, then nobody would be the one funding his escape to another country. Nobody would step back. Nobody would stay silent while the balance finally shifted. That evening, as his tantrum echoed through the house, I sat in my office, the door closed, the lamplight throwing long shadows across the floor. I listened, not to his words, but to the clarity inside me. I realized I had been living under an illusion, that responsibility alone could secure respect, that sacrifice alone could earn belonging. The truth was colder. You cannot buy your way into someone's heart. You cannot force a place in a family that has already decided you are a stranger. I thought about my parents, about how their debts tore them apart, how promises once made with love had dissolved into blame and bitterness. I thought about the boy I had been, watching adults unravel their lives because they refused to face reality until it was too late. And I told myself, not again. Not this time. This time I would not ignore the truth. This time, I would not continue pouring myself into a role where I was simultaneously depended on and denied. This time I would see clearly, even if it meant letting go of the dream I had built around Laura and her children. That day was the first crack, the one that split the illusion wide open. When I first began to set rules in the house, I believed I was doing the right thing. Rules create structure. They define safety. They prevent chaos from creeping in through every unlocked door. That was how I lived my life. Measured, principled, deliberate. I thought the children, especially Jake, might resist at first, but in time they would see that rules were not cages but boundaries that keep families intact. Laura, at least in words, supported me. She would nod when I told Jake he couldn't stay up until 2 in the morning gaming on a school night. She would agree when I said homework needed to be done before phones were unlocked. She would even murmur phrases like, "Mark's right," or "listen to him." But words are fragile when they are not reinforced by action. And over time, I noticed her support was only ever in whispers, never in the moments that demanded firmness. Jake and his sister learned that quickly. They sensed that my authority was conditional, easily bypassed. When I said no, they ran to their mother. And Laura, caught between loyalty to me and fear of losing their affection, wavered. More often than not, she softened my stance, turning my rules into suggestions, my boundaries into inconveniences. One night, I asked Jake to put his phone away at dinner. He smirked and kept scrolling. Laura, seeing the tension rise, gently told him, "Jake, maybe listen to Mark, okay?" Her voice carried no weight. It was a performance of agreement, not an enforcement. Jake put the phone down for 30 seconds, then picked it up again. I said nothing more, because I knew in that moment the battle was already lost. Not against Jake, but against Laura's silence. The children began comparing me to their biological father. It started subtly, questions like, "Dad would let us?" or "Dad doesn't care if we stay up." But soon it sharpened into outright dismissal. "You'll never be like him. You're not real." They spoke of him with selective nostalgia, remembering only his freedoms and his gifts, never his absences or failures. I became the obstacle, the unwanted substitute. I remember one afternoon, Jake came home bragging about how his father promised to take him on a road trip someday. The word hung there, vague and empty, but he clung to it as if it were a contract carved in stone. I asked him gently if his father had set a date. Jake rolled his eyes and said, "At least he doesn't make everything about money like you." The word stung because money was what had always held me upright, the only shield I had against ruin. I had built stability brick by brick, yet in his eyes that discipline was nothing but stinginess, control, a mark against me. Laura changed too. At first, when we married, she admired my caution. She used to say she felt safe with me, that she could finally breathe knowing the lights would stay on, the bills would be paid, and her children would never know the fear of losing a home. But safety, I realized, becomes invisible once it is constant. People stop seeing it as protection and start treating it as entitlement. She began to hint at expensive things more often. A new car, even though hers ran fine. A bigger vacation, even though we had just returned from one. Jewelry she happened to leave open in her browser, as if by accident. When I hesitated, she sighed, accusing me of being joyless, of turning every decision into a calculation. Her words were softer than Jake's, but the implication was the same. What I provided was never enough. The children absorbed her attitude like sponges. They began to say things that struck me deeper than they realized. "This is Mom's, not yours. Mom's house, Mom's money." They would stand in the kitchen I had paid for, using the appliances I had bought, eating the groceries I had carried in, and declare that none of it belonged to me. At first, I tried to laugh it off to remind myself that they were children testing boundaries. But repetition transforms words into truth. And soon, it was not just Jake but his sister echoing the same lines, both of them creating a chorus that erased me from the very foundation I had built. I began to see the cracks everywhere. Laura would defend me to her friends, saying I was dependable, responsible, the kind of man she could count on. But in the privacy of our home, she allowed the children's narrative to stand unchallenged. She never sat them down and said, "This man keeps you fed, keeps you warm, keeps you safe, and you will respect him." Instead, she let their dismissals hang in the air until they hardened into reality. There was one night that still burns in my memory. Jake wanted a new gaming console, the latest model. I had already told him no, explained that the one he had was only 2 years old and perfectly fine. He stomped off, muttering that I was cheap. Later, I overheard him in the hallway, telling his sister, "Don't worry, Mom will get it. Mark doesn't matter." When I confronted Laura about it, she looked tired. "They're just kids," she said. "They don't mean it." But they did mean it. Children always mean it. Their words might not be polished, but they are honest. They speak the truths adults are too polite to voice. And the truth was clear. To them, I was not a father, not even a stepfather worth acknowledging. I was a wallet with a pulse. The realization spread like frost over everything I touched. Family dinners felt colder. Vacations felt like performances. My money funding their smiles while my presence was ignored. Even intimacy with Laura felt strained, as though I was expected to keep proving myself worthy by covering every expense, every whim, every desire. It is a strange thing to be indispensable financially yet disposable emotionally. To carry all the weight of responsibility while being treated as an intruder in your own home. I would sit late at night in my office, staring at spreadsheets, numbers blurring into ghosts. I asked myself if this was the life I had chosen, or if it was the life that had chosen me because I could not walk away from promises once made. Still, I stayed. For a time, I convinced myself that endurance was love, that sacrifice would one day be recognized. But the more they dismissed me, the more Laura stayed silent, the more I realized that my endurance was not noble, it was invisible. They did not see it. They did not care. Boundaries, once ignored, wrought into falsehoods. And that was what my household had become. A stage where everyone played their parts, where I was applauded for responsibility in public but mocked and diminished in private. The respect I had built my life upon, the respect that had carried me through childhood poverty, through years of study, through every disciplined decision, was absent here. And without respect, what is a family but a transaction dressed in love's disguise? I reached a point where words meant nothing. I had spoken, explained, reasoned, even pleaded in subtle ways. And yet, nothing changed. Laura's assurances were thin paper that burned away the moment heat touched them. The children's dismissals had hardened into routine. Respect was not coming, no matter how long I waited. So I decided to act. Not loudly, not violently, but with the quiet precision I had lived my life by. If they insisted I was nobody, then I would become nobody in the one way that mattered to them. I stopped funding their comfort. First, it was small. When Jake asked about a trip with his school, I said, "You'll have to ask your mother." When his sister mentioned needing money for an extracurricular activity, I told her, "That's between you and Mom." I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I simply stepped aside. Then I stopped covering family extras altogether. Vacations, new gadgets, restaurant outings, all of it left to Laura. I kept paying the mortgage, utilities, the unavoidable necessities that kept the house standing. But everything else I cut my hands away from. First, no one noticed. Laura continued making promises to the children, believing I would quietly foot the bill as always. The kids continued treating me as if I were invisible, assuming life's luxuries would appear on schedule, just as they always had. But silence has a way of revealing itself. Within weeks, the cracks showed. Vacations were suddenly postponed. The console Jake wanted never arrived. Outings were canceled. The children, used to indulgence, grew restless. Their complaints echoed through the house. "Why can't we go? Why don't we have this? Dad would have bought it for us." Laura tried to smooth it over. She told them money was tight right now, that sometimes families needed to prioritize. But I saw the way their eyes flickered with suspicion, the way their voices grew sharper. They weren't suspicious of her. They were angry at me. In their eyes, it was my fault, because wasn't I the one who held the wallet? And if I chose not to open it, then I was choosing to punish them. But I wasn't punishing. I was clarifying. I was showing them who I truly was in their world. Not a father, not a partner, just a resource. Remove the resource and the illusion crumbles. The tension grew unbearable. Jake snapped at me one evening when I told him dinner was ready. "Why are you even talking to me? You don't do anything for us." His words struck me harder than he intended, because they were honest. To him, I truly had become nothing once the money stopped flowing. Laura, too, changed her tone. She asked me why I had become distant. She accused me of being cold, of punishing the children for not calling me Dad. I looked at her and said, "Laura, I'm not punishing them. I'm simply stepping into the role they've given me. If I am nobody, then nobody will not pay for their comforts." Her face went pale at that. She realized the truth but couldn't admit it. For years, she had allowed the children to minimize me, and now she was reaping what she had sown. One night, after another argument about canceled plans, I sat in my office surrounded by silence. My spreadsheets were open on the screen, numbers flowing neatly in columns, but my mind was elsewhere. I stared at the house around me. The house I paid for, the walls that had heard my sacrifices, the furniture chosen for comfort, the life I had constructed piece by piece. And yet, in that very house, I was a stranger. That was when the decision crystallized. I would leave, not in rage, not in dramatic fury, but with the same precision I had used all my life. The next weekend, when the house was quiet, I packed my things. Not everything, just what was mine, the essentials, the belongings that represented who I was before this family consumed me. A few suits, important documents, photographs of my parents. I placed them carefully into bags, loading them into the trunk of my car. When Laura saw, her eyes widened. "Mark, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was calm, flat, but every syllable carried weight. "You can't just walk away," she whispered. "I already have, Laura. Months ago, when you allowed your children to erase me, I stayed here, but I was gone. Now I'm only making it official." She began to cry, her voice trembling. "They're just kids. They don't understand." "They understand perfectly," I replied. "They understand that their words have power. They understand that you allowed them to strip me of respect while still expecting me to carry the weight of responsibility. And you understood too, Laura, you just didn't want to face it." The children heard her crying and came into the hallway. Jake's face twisted with confusion, then anger. "You're seriously leaving? Because we don't treat you like our dad? You're pathetic." His sister stood behind him, silent, her eyes wide. I looked at Jake, at the boy I had tried to guide, the boy I had carried through years of comfort he never once acknowledged. And I said, "You're right, Jake. I'm not your dad. And that's why I don't owe you my life." I turned back to Laura. "I won't live in a house where I am treated as both essential and worthless, where my money is welcome but my presence is despised. I thought I could build a family here. I was wrong." Her sobs filled the silence, but I did not falter. I picked up my keys, walked out the door, and did not look back. The night was cold, the air biting against my face as I loaded the last of my bags. I slid into the driver's seat, hands steady on the wheel. Behind me, the house loomed like a monument to wasted effort, a structure built on respect that never came. As I drove away, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not grief, but clarity. For the first time in years, I was not carrying the weight of falsehood. I had set down the illusion. I had walked away from being a wallet disguised as a man. They would face the consequences now, not from my vengeance but from my absence. Vacations would not return. Comforts would not replenish themselves. And Laura would realize, too late, that she had allowed her children to destroy the very foundation that held their lives together. I was done proving my worth to those who had already decided I had none. When I left that house, I thought I might feel hollow. I thought guilt would gnaw at me, that I would hear Laura's sobs in my sleep or Jake's last insult echoing through the night. But the silence that followed me was not torment. It was liberation. For the first time in years, I was alone with myself, unburdened by the endless weight of proving, providing, persuading. I had walked away from a stage where every act was transactional, every gesture measured not by love but by its monetary value. And in that silence, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. I had never been part of a family. I had been part of an arrangement, one that worked only as long as I kept paying the admission fee. People often romanticize sacrifice, as though pouring yourself into others will one day force them to see your worth. But sacrifice without respect is not noble, it is exploitation. I had been exploited by the very people I tried to save, and I had allowed it because I mistook endurance for loyalty. In the weeks that followed, Laura tried to reach out. The messages began with anger. "You're abandoning us. You're overreacting. You're punishing children for being children." Then they shifted to pleading, "We need you. The kids are struggling. Please come back. We can fix this." Finally, they grew quiet, reduced to occasional updates, as though she was trying to remind me the bond still existed, however faintly. But bonds built on falsehood are not bonds at all. They are ropes made of ash. They disintegrate the moment you try to hold on. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that life in that house grew harder quickly. The vacations stopped. The little luxuries disappeared. The children, once loud with entitlement, grew bitter with disappointment. Laura struggled to explain why the well had run dry. She tried to pick up extra work, but the truth weighed on her. She had allowed the man who carried their stability to walk away because she refused to demand respect from her children. Some said I should have stayed. that I should have fought harder, explained more, forced my way into their hearts. But love cannot be forced, and respect cannot be begged. If they saw me as nothing, then nothing I did would ever be enough. I began to see my life differently after that. For years, I had defined myself by what I could provide. My career in financial analytics was about control, order, prevention of collapse. I thought if I brought that discipline into my personal life, I could build a family immune to the failures of my parents. But families are not spreadsheets. They cannot be balanced by one man's effort alone. They require honesty, respect, reciprocity. Without those, no amount of calculation can hold them together. I did not stop caring for Laura overnight. I still thought of her in quiet moments, the way she used to laugh, the way she looked relieved when I first told her she would never have to worry about bills again. But love without respect is a slow poison, and she allowed her children to feed me that poison until I could no longer swallow it. Jake's words, "He's nobody to me, he's not my dad," became the symbol of everything. They were not just a teenager's cruelty. They were the truth of how that family saw me. I had carried them, clothed them, housed them, yet to them I was nobody, and I refused to live as nobody in a house I built. There is a lesson in all this, one I wish I had learned sooner. You cannot buy your way into belonging. You cannot spend enough, endure enough, or sacrifice enough to earn respect from those who have already decided you are unworthy of it. Family is not blood, but it is not money either. Family is respect, honesty, reciprocity. Without those, all that remains is a hollow performance, a masquerade that collapses the moment one person stops playing along. I sometimes wonder if Laura lies awake at night replaying the moment I walked out. If Jake, in the silence of his room, ever recalls the words he threw at me and wonders if they cost him more than he realized. Perhaps one day they will understand that the roof above their heads, the vacations they bragged about, the quiet stability they took for granted, were not the natural state of the world. They were gifts carried on my back. And when they chose to spit on the giver, the gifts ceased. But whether they learn or not is no longer my burden. I live differently now. My home is smaller, quieter, but it is mine alone. Every object within it feels lighter because it does not carry the weight of ingratitude. I no longer buy affection, no longer perform responsibility for people who refuse to see it. I live with dignity again. Was I cruel? Some will say yes. Some will say I should have stayed, should have endured, should have kept pouring until maybe one day they softened. But I ask those people, how long would you stay in a house where you are treated as both indispensable and invisible? How long would you let children mock you while their mother allows it? How many times would you accept being nobody before finally becoming nothing? I do not regret my decision. It was not abandonment. It was self-preservation. A family built on lies cannot be saved by one man's sacrifice. So I will leave you with this question. When respect is denied again and again, when your worth is erased in the very home you provide, what would you have done? Would you have stayed and withered in silence? Or would you have walked away, as I did, and reclaimed your name, your dignity, your life?